Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. So I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. I want to speak this morning with you about the arrogance of power. It is an important question, particularly when the President of the United States asserts that he can do anything he wants. Let's take a hard look at where we are. First, I want to talk about Cuba. The President of the United States, I think, now views himself as the liberator of Cuba, and he intends to pursue a policy in which, as he says, he can do virtually anything he wants. Cuba is 90 miles off our coast. We know that the Cuban regime is not one with which we are sympathetic. But we have had a peaceful relationship with Cuba, and now the president, he's cut off the oil, that's for sure. And it appears that Cuba is dark. That's right. It has lost power, all power. And so there is a real feeling now on the part of the Trump administration that they can take Cuba. I want you all to stop and think for a minute, not about the policies involved, but the attitude involved. If the President of the United States believes he's above the law, that the President of the United States can give an order which can change, if you will, the order in the world, my friends, we have a problem. It is the arrogance of power. Donald Trump should not have unlimited power. And what happens in Cuba, we're going to have to watch and see what happens in the days ahead. The Cuban people are not happy, it is clear. But does that mean that there should be an overthrow of the existing government? And more than that, does it mean that the United States of America should have a free hand in terms of what happens in Cuba? I am raising this question with you despite all the other issues in the world because of Donald Trump's statements that he can do anything he wishes. That, to me, is the central question. And let's take a hard look at Iran. It is the same attitude being reflected in Iran. However, what the president has done is absolutely fascinating because the limitations on presidential power are now clear. After saying that the United States is oil independent, doesn't need anybody in the world, the president comes to NATO, to our European allies, and says, we want you to participate in opening the Strait of Hormuz. And the allies, Great Britain, France, Germany, even China, is saying, wait a minute, if you have all the power, why don't you just do it yourself? And the president retaliates by saying, if you don't help us, we're going to diss you. Let me tell you something, that's not presidential leadership. That's bullying. And the world is now responding to Donald Trump's bullying by saying, no, we won't be bullied. But the president then turns and threatens our allies. Now, you will recall a podcast I did last week in which I talked about the fact that the president had not notified our allies of anything. Our allies were in the dark. And it would appear, like Cuba, our allies are in the dark today. There is something fundamentally wrong with the way this president is conducting policy. And I come back to the theme of the day, the arrogance of power. There are things that Donald Trump has done, whether in Venezuela or in Iran or in other parts of the world, for which he has not received any consent from Congress. And I must tell you, bluntly, frankly, clearly, when you have a president who acts as Donald Trump is doing, you would think we had a dictator. not a president. There is something fundamentally wrong with what Donald Trump is doing. Now, he says the greater good will be achieved. Well, wait a minute. Let's think about Iran for a moment. Do you remember when the president said he had obliterated all nuclear capability? And yet the argument being used, and I listened to it yesterday, particularly being expressed by key Republicans in the United States Senate and House of Representatives, is we are acting in order to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Well, I'm in favor of preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon, but the question that has to be asked very simply is, if their nuclear program was obliterated, what's going on? There is something fundamentally wrong in the way this administration is conducting foreign policy. And when you insult your allies, which Donald Trump has done repeatedly and is doing again, we have a problem. Remember, the most important single alliance the United States has had has been with NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This treaty has lasted for years, for decades, because of trust. Do you sincerely believe that anybody trusts Donald Trump? And remember, when it comes to the arrogance of power, under our system, a president has a lot of power. But there are concerns now about what Donald Trump is doing and how he's doing it, except from the Republicans. It would seem that Speaker Johnson and Senator Thune, the Republican leader in the Senate, are willing to give Donald Trump a blank check. Well, there needs to be a check on Donald Trump. And I believe the check will come quickly. We just heard that the Republican majority in the House of Representatives is shrinking again. Another Republican is quite ill, as Donald Trump and Speaker Johnson revealed yesterday. What that means is that the House is going to flip, and I have no doubt that it's going to flip. And that's why Donald Trump is so worried right now about the future. Because if the House flips, and there is a chance the Senate will flip, Donald Trump will be left as president, but with opposition roundly growing in the Congress. These are serious times, and the arrogance of power continues to grow. By the way, you heard, was it last week or the week before? One can hardly keep track. Donald Trump said, we won in Iran. It's over. And yet, the president has just announced he is postponing his trip to China. Why is he postponing his trip to China? Because of what's going on in Iran. There is something wrong here because there are inconsistent messages being sent by this president. And we, the American people, are left to wonder. And this is not the way American policy should be run. This is not the way friendship should be built. This is not the way we should be proceeding. And let me point something else out. We have an ally in Iran, and that is Israel. And the Israelis are continuing with their attempts to bring to an end the Iranian regime. When a new Iranian leader pops up, the Israelis are right there. And when they go after the various leaders of the Iranian regime, they take them out. What does that mean for the future of Iran? And what does that mean in terms of coordination between the United States and Israel? You know, Donald Trump is still talking about talking to people who have power. But gradually, that number is being reduced. Now, I have no brook with the Iranian leadership. These are terrible people. And what the Israelis are doing is, in their view, in their national interest. And the question becomes, very frankly, what Iran is now headed towards. These are all questions which should be addressed in a comprehensive way. But have you heard anything from the administration that makes sense when it comes to foreign policy? I have said before that in foreign policy, a president is virtually king. There is no restraint on a president. There are no war powers acts which can be invoked, which can limit a president's power. At least for 60 days after the conflict begins, a president has a free hand. What this means for the United States in terms of foreign policy is critical. And it means that when our allies look to us for trust, they are going to scratch their heads and say, well, we have no idea what Donald Trump is doing. We have no idea what this president is doing. And interestingly enough, a poll just came out, not that I necessarily believe polls, that show that 75% of the American people feel that Joe Biden performed his office as president better than Donald Trump. Joe Biden's popularity is soaring in contrast to Donald Trump's. These are practical facts. And the question becomes, what will the Republicans do? How will they summon their forces in the election, which is only months away? For Republicans and for Trump supporters, the most important critical thing domestically is the power of the electorate. Will they veto, if you will, by their vote, the Trump administration? We will be watching tonight the primary results from Illinois. Senator Dick Durbin is retiring. It is now a contested primary. Who will emerge as the victor in Illinois in the Democratic primary? And what impact will that have on speculation about control of the United States Senate and, indeed, control of the Democratic Party? And we also have a primary coming up here in California. But I want to make a point about California because I think it is important to understand. In Illinois, the Democratic primary is a primary between Democrats. In California, under the rules designed by Arnold Schwarzenegger and approved by the people of California, the runoff is between the two top contenders. In short, it could be two Republicans, it could be two Democrats. There is no Democratic primary or Republican primary. So I want to make my position crystal clear. I believe that what is happening in Illinois is a good thing, a Democratic primary, where the decision will be made by the Democratic Party about who the nominee should be. And that's the way elections ought to be held. The system in California is not good, it's not workable, and it's not desirable. And that, to me, is something else which we all need to take into account. By the way, did you hear Donald Trump's attack on Gavin Newsom? Gavin Newsom suffers from dyslexia. And what have you heard from this president? An attempt to disqualify Gavin Newsom because he has a disability. Let me remind you that there have been many great men who have had dyslexia. Among them, Albert Einstein. Among them, Nelson Rockefeller. And you can go down a list of people who have dyslexia. That does not disqualify them from higher office. Any more, my friends, than Franklin Roosevelt being paralyzed disqualified him from being president and ultimately considered to be one of the three top presidents in the history of our country. And by the way, the president who is generally regarded as the number one president is Abraham Lincoln, and he suffered from severe depression, as we know from history. When Donald Trump makes these kinds of statements, he demonstrates once again the arrogance of power. And so let me return to where we began. Whether it's Cuba or Iran or Venezuela, no matter where it may be, the fact that Donald Trump considers himself above the law, a power unto himself, is very dangerous. And you can see it in the reaction of our allies, our friends. That's the point this morning, and that's the point I wanted to make. And I hope you understand. We have in Donald Trump a very dangerous person in the presidency. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You could write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links in the show notes to connect with us on social media. That will be particularly useful on Friday when I take your questions. Remember, by the way, to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which, of course, is our goal. Remember that this show has been getting so much positive attention that we are excited to bring advertising support on board. And you hear that at the beginning and the end of the broadcast. This will help us create more opportunities for Around the Political World. And we're very happy about that. My special appreciation, of course, to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this podcast. Gogo, many thanks for all that you do. And ladies and gentlemen, I will be back tomorrow with more, right here on Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.